So Stefan Evert, he's going to present this E-VIEW-alation presentation. It's a long title. I will give him the turn to talk.
Okay, so thank you very much. This is joint work between the University of Erlangen with Peter Uhrig and Thomas Proisl and the University of Darmstadt with Sabine Bartsch. The two main things I'm going to talk about today is one, the results of very comprehensive evaluation studies of association measures for collocation identification, where we focus on some parameters that people haven't paid much attention to in previous work, such as the type of the kind of corpus used as a basis for the cooccurrence data, the size of the cooccurrence context, and so on. And a second aspect of novel aspect is a new approach to disseminating evaluation results in these situations where you have too many parameters to pack the results into a talk or into a short conference paper. We've built an interactive web-based viewer for the evaluation results, which gives you access to all the data. So as you all know, multi-word expressions play an important role in computation lexicography. Here's a range of different types of multi-word expressions. We're going to focus here on several productive classes that are particularly important and that kind of multi-word expressions that you would typically find in a collocations dictionary, which include lexical collocations, lexically determined but largely compositional word combinations, light verb constructions as a specific subtype of these, noun compounds in English, which are often treated as collocations, for instance in the Oxford Collocations dictionaries, and various typical expressions or cliches or stereotypes that don't have any particular linguistic features, but that are just habitual ways of expressing things. There's a long tradition of work in automatic identification of multi-word expressions from corpus data. The most important cue we have is the cooccurrence frequency of words. So based on even the first operations of Firth's ideas of collocations by Sinclair, we found that the main criterion of a collocation, the main property of a lexicalized combinations is that the words tend to occur together very often in language. But just using cooccurrence frequency isn't a suitable criteria, so the data are quantified using various statistical association measures. There's actually a wide range of association measures. There are around 70 different measures that people have suggested over the years. So evaluating those and finding the best measures or finding out whether there are any substantial difference between different measures has been an important aspect of multi-word expression research. In recent years, the main focus has been on combining these cooccurrence information with other criteria often derived from the typical properties of lexicalized multi-word expressions, such as non-compositionality, non-modifiability, and non-substitutability. So try to find corpus correlates of these properties and then combine all the different features using machine learning techniques. Since that requires a specific gold standard, and a machine learner will learn to recognize specific features of multi-word expressions, the focus is usually on a particular subtype of multi-word expressions, for instance, work on extracting particle verbs or noun compounds. So our goal in the evaluation, in contrast to many other studies which focus on testing a new algorithm that has been developed or which focus on a particular subtype of multi-word expression, we are interested in fairly general questions such as these listed here. For one thing, we focus more on a general notion of collocation, the type of word combination that's entered in collocation dictionary that's important for lexicography, but doesn't have very clear-cut criteria, defining criteria. And then we're interested in finding out which association measures correlate with this general idea for collocation, and what the effects of all the other parameters are, which is something you can only find out in a targeted comparative evaluation study, so where we define a general setting and then can vary different parameters. For any evaluation study, we need a gold standard. Because we have so many different parameters, it's impossible to produce a gold standard by manually annotating candidate lists. There are just too many candidate lists that we would have to check manually. So as a reference, and because of the lexicographic interest of this work, we use two collocations dictionary, the BBI Combinatory Dictionary of English, a pre-corpus dictionary based on lexicographic intuitions, lexicographers' intuitions about typical word combinations, and the second edition of the Oxford Collocations Dictionary for Students of English, which is corpus-based, much more comprehensive, and also has a much better notion of what a collocation is or which types of collocation should be included in a dictionary than the BBI. The comparison here is interesting because there's always a risk that a corpus-based dictionary will be biased towards certain types of extraction techniques and certain corpora, namely the ones that were used in the compilation of the dictionary. So it's interesting to have the BBI as a kind of control here. We didn't use the full dictionaries, mostly because the BBI isn't available in machine-readable form. So we selected a set of 203 node words. It's called the Bartsch 224 gold standard because they were selected by Sabine Bartsch, and because we started off with 224 node words and then whittled them down a little because some of the more obscure nodes had to be omitted. For the BBI entries, we manually extracted all lexical words found in these 203 entries. Lexical words being nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. They are all lemmatized to have because we believe that most collocations are rather collocations of lexemes rather than word forms. And in total, we obtained 2,845 node collocate pairs. Of course, collocations dictionaries don't only include two-word combinations, they also include longer phrases. In order to have a consistent evaluation setting, we reduce these longer phrases to two-word combinations. So we assume that there's a core, a two-word combination at the core, and that a lexicographer, by seeing this two-word combination, would be able to infer the entire phrase. Getting data from the OCD was easier because there's an XML version of the OCD, which also Peter Uhrig and Thomas Proisl used in previous work, and we directly extracted all collocations from the corresponding entries. There's a slight difference here. In the BBI, we just used the entries for the 203 nodes. In the Oxford Collocations Dictionary, the structure of the entries is determined by syntactic structure, so it's not sufficient to just take the entries for the nodes because we also have to look for the nodes in other entries where they might be listed as collocates, giving us a much larger set of 18,500 node collocate pairs. Here's a brief example of how we extracted the gold standard from the BBI dictionary. So here the node is measure. Because we're working at a lemma level, the reason lemma level, we don't distinguish between the noun measure and the verb to measure something. One reason is that in the collocations don't distinguish between parts of speech in the BBI, and also some of the corpora we tested don't have part of speech information, so we had to bring everything down to the lowest common denominator. So what we did here is we took the two entries for the noun and the verb measure and extracted all the lexical words found in these entries, giving us the collocates cubic, dry, liquid, metric, certain, good, make, from made to measure, and so on. Since we're working completely in lemmatized data, we also include the collocations of measures. So the BBI has a separate entry for the plural measures. They're also included as collocates of the noun measure, or of the lemma measure. So in addition, we get carry, take, coercive. Again, particle verbs, because most of our researchers don't recombine particle verbs, they're reduced to the base verb, and the assumption again being that the particle verb can be reconstructed from the collocation. If you compare this to the OCD data, some of the collocates from the BBI aren't listed in the Oxford Collocations Dictionary, but then we've got many additional ones not listed in the BBI. I can see how much larger the Oxford Collocations Dictionary is. There are 158 additional collocates I wasn't able to list on this slide. Okay, now for the parameters that we have included in this study, I said it's a fairly comprehensive large-scale evaluation study. So we looked at 20 different association measures. That's sort of including all your traditional favorites like log likelihood, mutual information. Somehow log likelihood got shifted down here. T-score, chi-squared, the dice coefficient, which is used by Sketch Engine, but then also some more obscure measures such as minimum sensitivity, or recently suggested measures such as Stefan Evert delta P, which has become fairly popular in corpus linguistics. We look at different co-occurrence contexts of different sizes. That's one of the parameters that previous work has hardly ever taken a look at. So people either use a fixed span of 3 words or 5 words or whatever, or they use syntactic dependencies, but here we try a systematic comparison of small, so that's 1 word to the left and right, 2 words to the left and right, up to 10 words, direct syntactic dependency relations, and up to co-occurrence within entire sentences. And finally, we look at a fairly long range of corpora of different sizes and different quality. So as a sort of a standard reference or standard approach would be to use the British National Corpus, 100 million words, or in modern terms, 0.1 billion words of text, British English from the 1990s. And then we have various other corpora, a corpus of movie subtitles, because some people suggested they are better represent human language knowledge better than even the British National Corpus and other reference corpora, a newspaper corpus, various web-based corpora, including the Wikipedia, and web corpora called web pages of different sizes, ranging from 2 billion words in the UK WAG corpus to 10 billion words in the Ian Cal corpus. As you can see here, we have a range of web corpora which allows us to see what the effect of whether size matters, whether 10 billion words is really better than just 2 billion words having material from a relatively similar sources. We also collected everything into a very large web corpus, and if you want to scale beyond the 10 billion word range, then one possibility is to use the n-gram databases provided by Google. They are web n-grams based on a 1 trillion word corpus, and there are n-grams from the many books that Google has scanned, where we have around 50 billion words of British English text and 500 billion words of general English, including American English and other varieties. Okay, so the evaluation proceeds as follows. Because we focus entirely on association measures, we don't have other components, other filtering components, so the main task is a ranking of collocation candidates extracted from the corpus. We perform a global evaluation on our data set, which means we take all the word pairs involving the 203 nodes selected by Sabine Bartsch, and then do a global ranking according to one of the association measures, here a ranking according to the log likelihood measures. In this ranking, we can then annotate the true positives, that is the word pairs that are found in our reference, in this case the BBI dictionary, and for an n-best list of a given size, here for the first 10, the 10 most highly ranked pairs, we can compute the precision. We've got 5 true positives out of 10 pairs. That gives us a 50% precision. And the recall, we found 5 out of 2,845 collocations in a dictionary, which gives us a very low recall of 0.2%. And now the size, the number of candidates we take, that determines the trade-off between precision and recall. Since there are many different choices here and it's not clear where you want to make that trade-off, it's best to collect the results for different trade-off points in a single precision recall graph. So in this graph, each point in this graph represents a particular n-best list. For instance, here we've got an n-best list with n equals 1193, so 1,193 top-ranked candidates. And the position of the point on the x-axis shows us that we get a recall of 10%. That's 285 out of the 2,845 collocations in the dictionary, and a precision of 23.9%. The advantage of these graphs is that you don't have to take a fixed trade-off point, and with a single glance you can see all the possible trade-off points, and you can also compare different association measures, rankings from different association measures at a single glance. So this is the ranking for the log likelihood measure. That's what you get for mutual information. We're not applying any frequency filters at this point. That's one of the reasons why mutual information performs very badly here. That's the ranking of t-score. So it's clear that log likelihood is the best of these 3 measures. However, now we get a problem. That's the ranking obtained by the dice coefficient, which also explains why the sketch engine team decided to use it. It's very good for the very top-ranked collocates, but if you aim to achieve a larger recall, then log likelihood seems to be a better measure. So that's a problem for the evaluation, because we want to say clearly one or the other is better. So we need a composite criterion which tells us which of these measures is better. And the standard criterion for that is to compute the area under this graph. That's also known as average precision, because we're averaging the trade of different precision values for different recall points, up to recall of 50%, because we often don't get full coverage of the gold standard, so we cannot take recall up to 500%. So that gives us an AP50 value of 17.4% for log likelihood and 18.8% for the dice coefficient. So in this case, the dice coefficient actually performs better than log likelihood. Okay, and then we can continue adding further association measures. I think I'll stop here after the first 8. There's still 12 to go, but it might get a little bit cluttered. And what we can also do is, now that we've got 8 measures in the plot, we can now change the other parameters, which gives us a kind of animation. For instance, starting from this 5-word span, we can look how the results change with smaller concurrence context. That's a 3-word span, 2-word span, 1-word span. And syntactic context, you can see it's smaller the context size, the better the results get. Even though you lose some of the coverage, you'll not find all the true co-occurrences of, say, a verb and a noun collocate or noun-verb collocation. You still get better performance in this evaluation. Sticking with the syntactic context, we can also compare different corpora. That's the subtitles corpus, actually a little worse than the BNC. That's Wikipedia, also worse than the BNC, even though it's 10 times as large. A web corpus, 2 billion word web corpus, is also worse than the BNC. But if I now go on to larger web corpora, that's the joint 16 billion word web corpus, then we actually start to outperform the BNC. Okay, that's a bit of an overload. I could go on for hours if the chair would let me. So we have to, in order to make sense of these results, we have to look at overview plots that show the AP50 values, just the composite values for different conditions. So here, for instance, are coverage values. As you can see, with web corpora, we get basically 100% coverage of the BBI gold standard and also of the Oxford Collocations Dictionary, unless we start to apply frequency thresholds. So if we apply a very high frequency thresholds, then we lose a substantial amount of coverage. So frequency thresholds, high frequency thresholds are clearly not an answer. That's the effect of context size for the Oxford Collocations Dictionary for the BBI gold standard. So that's in the British National Corpus. As you can see, smaller contexts are always better. The best thing you can do is to parse your data and use syntactic dependencies. Now, those are the results in the ENCOW web corpus, 10 billion word web corpus, slightly better than BNC, but the effect of context size is exactly the same. Smaller contexts are better, regardless of which corpus you have. That's the application of a 50 frequency threshold of 50. It's really 2 different plots. You can see there's a tiny little change there, but no substantial difference. These are the results across different corpora. So you can see the BBL down here. We get very similar performance. The most interesting observation is that for the web corpora, scaling up to 2 billion web corpus, more data doesn't always help. So if you have lots of web data, you still get worse results than from the BNC because of the low quality. But scaling up further continually improves the results until the largest web corpora actually outperform the BNC. Google Web Ngrams are just too horrible to talk about any further. Here's a closer look at the frequency threshold, because one of the most surprising findings here was that there's basically no effect from the frequency threshold. And if you look at this plot here, which tries lots of different frequency threshold, this confirms that for all the corpora, we basically have no effect until the coverage breaks down, and then we have slight breakdown here. Another very important finding that I was very happy about is that there are hardly any interactions between the parameters. So of course, there are differences between association measures, and actually different association measures are useful for different gold standards. So for the OCD, we get best results from log likelihood or T-score. For the BBI dictionary, we get best results from chi-squared association measure. But they don't interact with any of the other parameters, at least not substantially. So you can see these are the different association measures in different colors, and regardless of which corpus I use, here for the BBI, always mutual information squared and chi-squared come out as the top measures. Same for context size. They always come out as the top measure. There's an effective context size, but it's a similar effect for all the association measures. And that's the effect of a frequency threshold. You can see there is a small improvement in the British National Corpus here, which is more pronounced, of course, for frequency-sensitive measures like mutual information. But again, no fundamental change in how the parameters affect these measures. That's the effect of frequency threshold. It really only has an effect on MI. Okay, now that we're lost in all these results, and I have only shown you a small part of the full result, so you have to take my word when I keep saying there are no effects. If you look at the other corpora, the other conditions I wasn't able to concede that, you have to take my word that the other 12 association measures aren't better. And of course, these overview plots, which are just based on AP50, hide a lot of the details of the trade-off between precision and recall. We cannot just upload that as supplementary materials, all those plots. So our solution was to implement a web-based interactive viewer, which I'm going to demonstrate. You can actually look at it here, use the beta version, which is the one I'm showing now. So it looks like that if you start the viewer. Up at the top here, I'm sorry, the writing might be a bit small now. Up at the top, you can select the various parameters, all the parameters in our evaluation, and then the graph at the bottom here will update automatically. So, for instance, we can switch between, these are evaluation results for the OCD. These are results for the BBI. Just 1 minute. These are results for the BBI and can switch between these two. Let's stick with the OCD. So you can see now we get the full results up to 100% recall, not just up to 50% as I showed in the presentation. We're seeing the same 8 association measures, but you can select any of the other